Can you share your story with our listeners?
Okay, well, the story starts with me. I was the person who found pornography at the age of 9 years old. And at that point in time, the only thing I knew about it was that when I would look at it, it would give me some kind of a rush or a pain relief thing that I just had never experienced before. And I had a lot of pain. I had a pretty rough childhood, a lot of things going on. And it turns out that the pornography actually somehow gave me some soothing. It was like a go-to medicine or whatever to help me. So I, where I put it, where I found it I found it in my dad's workplace. I put it back after I looked at it, and then I would continue to go back there on occasion whenever I felt a little bit stressed or whatever, and go back to it. However, one of the times that I looked at it, I was caught in the act of putting it back. And what I was told at that time was that pornography is a guy thing, and because it's a guy thing and I'm growing up, I should just, look at it if I need to, but make sure I always put it back. But the real thing about pornography is the secrecy. Secrecy is a big key because it's shameful and whatever else. So I was told, don't ever let your mother know that you're looking at that stuff, and don't ever let her know that it's my stuff that I look at also, was the advice from my father. So that set up secrecy as a very important thing. And there were a lot of secrets I kept over the years for my father as we were going along the way because of his infidelities and because of his behaviors. So I learned that, you can hide the shame just by being secretive about it. Just don't let anybody know that it exists. However, I also isolated then. I became very lonely, very isolated, and kind of all on my own. I kept trying to want to fit into groups, but the groups of people that I gravitated towards were groups that were in some unhealthy behaviors also, and so it wasn't helping me heal. And I really didn't understand at that point in time anything about the God part of it and the sin part of it. All I knew was that it was helping me cope with the things that were stressing me. And so I just, I went in from there. I tried to follow it because being a guy thing, I thought, well, I would fit in with the rest of the guys, if I participated with them. But I never did fit in with them. I was kind of the geek of the neighborhood, so that just didn't work. What I did notice, though, as I moved along, was that I could stay away from it for a while. It was something you could avoid, but even after you avoided it, it was always still there. It was right around the corner, and you knew it was your go-to if you needed it. And then it became a subconscious thing. You didn't have to think about it. Your body kind of called forth the desire to go look for it, and so you followed it when you needed it, quote, needed it. And so that's how that worked. Now, as I started to get a little older, got into high school and whatever, I was still struggling with it, but on and off, on an on and off basis. White knuckle for a while and then go back to it again. But I got to a point where I was such a loner, I was so isolated and so segregated from all these other groups, I really started to get very, very depressed. And the depression kept getting worse and worse and worse until at one point in time, I went to a favorite spot of mine, a lighthouse that's on a large lake that we live near, and we actually now live on. And I was watching a lightning storm drift over the lake, and as it's passing away from our area, and I just imagined myself, why don't I just walk towards the lightning, and eventually the lake will get deep enough, and it'll all be over for me. So I was suicidal at that point. Thought there was no hope. But I didn't do it. And what I did instead was, when I got to a phone, there weren't cell phones in those days, but when I got back home to a phone, I called Jeannie. And, we weren't real close at that point in time. We didn't have a real long going. But somehow God, I guess, inspired me that she was the person I was supposed to call and talk to. And we had an incredible conversation. And I know that, she would tell you things about that conversation that she didn't know about me, and I didn't know I was telling her. It was like I was spilling my guts out on that situation.
We grew up in the same neighborhood, and so we knew each other. And when he shared all of this, it overwhelmed me. I didn't know anything about pornography. So when I got off the phone with him, I went and asked my dad. And my dad had kind of taken Bruce under his wing. As Bruce said, he came from a very abusive and dysfunctional family. And my father knew him and had kind of, wanted to help him. And so my dad then at that point understood and knew I had shared with him. So my dad was a very strong moral man that pornography was wrong. And so he began to try to mentor Bruce out of some of those kinds of behaviors. But through that process, we got very close very quickly. Fast forward a few years, finishing college, we were positive that once we were married, this wasn't going to be a problem anymore because we would be able to be sexually intimate. We thought it was all about sexuality. Well, that wasn't the case. And now, of course, we know so much more about pornography, but in those days we didn't. And so 3 months into marriage, we began our first counseling sessions to deal with this unhealthy sexual behavior that was interfering with our intimacy. Throughout our marriage, we've been married now 47 years, but throughout our marriage, we would really work together against this problem, and he would try anything and everything that was new that came out to try to help. He'd do really well for a long time. Then there'd be some kind of a crisis, something would happen. We now understand it had a lot to do with stress in his life. But the big thing that happened for us was that when internet porn came along, he had a friend who introduced him to internet pornography, and that he went back to the idea of secrecy. He did not share that with me. I thought we were doing well. I thought he was getting along fine, but that wasn't the case, was it?
No, it wasn't. And the grab from internet pornography, it's so different than anything in any print-based stuff that existed. And so I was just totally consumed by it, but secretive about it because I didn't want to go back there with her and talk to her about the fact that that's what I was doing again. So I was just, using it in a very secretive manner. But it just took me down paths you would never, ever, ever want anybody to go to. It was so against my morals. It was so against what I knew about God and understood about life and marriage and everything else. But it became compulsive. It became such a strong pull that despite wanting to be rid of it, I couldn't. I couldn't put it away. And so I tried basically the kinds of things that you normally would. I was active at church, and I went to spiritual direction for a while. I went to the sacraments. I used the sacrament of reconciliation on a regular basis. And what I found out, though, is that it wasn't just us that didn't know anything about pornography. It's people in the church didn't know that much about it either. And the priests would I got worried about having to tell the priest every time I went to confession about the same sins. So I would jump around. I would go to different parishes and find one that the priest didn't know me, so I could say my confessions there. But they would tell me things like, pray harder, and try harder, and use the sacraments more. And what I found out is that didn't really help. And so I was getting back to that point again where I was starting to get hopeless and starting to get even suicidal again, saying, well, if this is what it's going to be, I don't know if I can take this. So I found a group to belong to, a 12-step group. And the first meeting I went to, they gave a man an award for 35 years in the group. It was his 35-year anniversary medallion with that group. And I went home from that just wringing my hands saying, I can't do this for the next 35 years of my life. Then I became strongly suicidal. I was just really too much to take.
And about that same time, and we're missing some details for time frame here, but it became a passion of mine to understand what was going on in people with unhealthy sexual behaviors. And so I worked for the Catholic Church, and in my reputation, I guess, at that time became where if there was anyone who was struggling with some kind of issue with pornography, masturbation, infidelity, any of those things, they would be sent to me. So I became a lot of penance for a lot of people in our diocese. And at one point, that's what happened to Bruce. He went to one of these priests who I had done a training for, and his penance was to go see Jeannie Hannemann at Elizabeth Ministry International. And, of course, he had no idea who Bruce was. And so that's when Bruce came to me, and he confessed the issues with the internet pornography. And it was so devastating for me. And so I understand the pain of spouses when they, have this kind of a disclosure that's just overwhelming and depressing as well. So while he was thinking suicide, I began thinking divorce. So we were both in that kind of a place of giving up. Satan really had a grip on both of us. But then, by the grace of God, we had a profound experience, and we knew that we loved each other, and we knew that God loved us, and we had to stop being against each other and be against the problem. And so we began looking for more and more support for Bruce. He tried everything, in-house treatment. We did everything that we could find that was out there. And then by the grace of God, again, I found online a new program. And this program was cutting-edge science, and it was based on retraining the brain. And so he enrolled in that program, long story short, he turns out to be the third person in the world that was in this program. The individual who funded this program put in over $2.5 million into the research and development of this program because he's a faith-filled man, and he believed the idea of what Bruce was so depressed about, once an addict, always an addict, that could not be true. That if God could heal, like he did when he walked the earth, the lepers, he could heal today as well. And so in that processing, he created this amazing program with brain scientists from Harvard and top people everywhere around the world, that they created what they call the brain science of change, exercises to change your brain. So Bruce enrolled. He got a new spiritual director, and the full force of his faith, the support that both of us were trying to give each other. And this time, we did not let secrecy win. You see, deceit and dishonesty are so much a part of this culture of evil. And so at this point, before this, hardly anyone knew. My dad knew. That was about it from our family. We began asking for help from everyone and anyone that we could, and we took it out into the light. And as a result of that, we were able to not only find the healing Bruce needed for his brain and his spirit, but we also were able to save our marriage. And we then were very blessed to talk to our bishop. We had a new bishop at the time. He, by God's grace, again, asked me to expand Elizabeth ministry from just the childbearing issues, as we had been for years, into the areas of sexuality and relationships. And he said, and I'd like you to start with pornography. So I was like, whoop, Bruce wasn't with me, but I said, I need to tell him. So I told him. And he put this particular link to this program online onto the diocesan website. So many people came to this website. They contacted the diocese and said, this is great. How do you know about us? We're brand new. And so we ended up going there, teaching their entire staff about theology of the body and many of the Catholic concepts related to sexuality. And then, again, by the grace of God, this wonderful gentleman made the decision he's no longer doing a secular version. He's only doing this Catholic version. And he's not even Catholic, so it's kind of cool. But this program now, our bishop asked Bruce to take an early retirement, and myself. And so we've been spending this so-called retirement going around training clergy, helping people, and really taking this beautiful resource that we have and combining it with the Catholic faith and helping people.
Wow, that's incredible.